Imagine living with someone you trust, only to discover they've been hiding a life-altering secret from you all along. What would you do if everything you believed in came crashing down? I thought I knew everything about my wife, but when her secret was exposed, my world turned upside down. The way I found out and what followed will leave you speechless. Stay tuned, this is a story you won't want to miss. From the outside, we seemed like the perfect couple. My wife and I had built a life together that anyone would admire, laughter filled our home, and our bond felt unbreakable. We had our ups and downs, like any relationship, but nothing that ever made me question her loyalty. I trusted her completely. Friends would always tell us how lucky we were to have such a strong, loving marriage. Every day was routine, morning coffee together, work, dinners at home, and late-night conversations about our future. It felt safe. It felt stable. I thought I knew everything about her, and she was my partner in every sense of the word. Little did I know, beneath that calm surface, a storm was brewing, one that would shatter everything I thought I knew. At first, it was just the little things, so subtle that I didn't see them for what they were. Looking back now, the signs were all there, but in the moment, I ignored them. I guess it's human nature to trust the people we love, to give them the benefit of the doubt. I never imagined my wife could be hiding something from me. But the truth is, the changes in her behavior started long before I realized what was happening. She began coming home later than usual, and at first, she had good reasons. Work was overwhelming, she said. She had taken on new projects, or there were last-minute meetings she couldn't avoid. She always had a reason, and at first, I didn't question it. Why would I? We all have busy times in life, and I knew her job could be demanding. I tried to be supportive, even though the extra hours meant we were spending less time together. I would wait for her at home, dinner sometimes getting cold, but I figured it was just a phase. But then, I started noticing the phone calls. They came more frequently, always at odd times. Whenever her phone buzzed, she'd pick it up quickly, glancing at the screen with a flicker of hesitation before stepping out of the room to answer. Her voice would drop to a near whisper, as if she didn't want me to overhear the conversation. When I asked who it was, her answers were vague, just someone from work, she'd say, or nothing important. She always smiled when she said it, like it was no big deal. But something about the way she dismissed my questions felt off. Soon, it wasn't just the late hours and the secretive phone calls. I started noticing a distance between us, something intangible but undeniable. We still did all the things we used to, dinners together, movie nights, weekend outings, but she wasn't really their star. It was like she was going through the motions. When we sat down to eat, her eyes would glaze over, lost in her own thoughts. I would talk, and she would nod and smile, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. When I asked if something was wrong, she'd always say, "I'm just tired." But this was more than tiredness. It felt like she was slipping away from me, and I couldn't understand why. There was one night that really sticks out in my mind. We were watching a movie on the couch, something we used to enjoy doing together. Halfway through, I noticed she was checking her phone again, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her face. When I asked what was so funny, she quickly put her phone down and muttered something about a meme from a friend. But that smile, it wasn't the kind of smile you share with just anyone. It lingered in my mind long after the movie ended. It wasn't just the smile, though. There were the unexplained absences on weekends, the sudden work trips that never seemed to happen before, and the way she started being more protective of her phone. Before, we were always open with each other. Her phone would be left lying around the house, unlocked, no passwords or secrets. But now, her phone was always with her, always locked. She never left it out of her sight. In the past, we had a relationship built on trust and transparency, so I never had a reason to doubt her. But the more these little things started to pile up, the harder it became to ignore that nagging feeling in my gut. Something was wrong, even though I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. Every time I asked her if everything was okay, she'd brush me off, saying that I was overthinking it. She'd laugh and say, "You're being paranoid, babe. Everything's fine." But I wasn't paranoid. I knew my wife. Or at least, I thought I did. Despite her reassurances, a part of me started to wonder if I was just being crazy, if maybe I really was overthinking things. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman I had been with for years, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was hiding something from me. And that feeling of doubt, it slowly began to consume me. The changes were small, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. But once I noticed them, it was all I could think about. I started paying closer attention to every move she made, every word she said. The tension between us grew, though neither of us acknowledged it. It was like we were living in two different worlds, hers full of secrets, and mine full of suspicions. I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went, but I was about to find out. And when the truth finally came to light, it was worse than anything I could have imagined. The small clues that had once seemed insignificant were starting to pile up, each one adding weight to the doubt that had begun to settle in my mind. It was like a jigsaw puzzle, where the pieces didn't quite fit together, but slowly, the picture was starting to form, and it wasn't a pretty one. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. I wanted so badly to believe that everything was fine, that my wife was still the person I trusted with my whole heart. But as the days went on, I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that something was very wrong. It was the little things that kept nagging at me. The phone calls she always took in private, the mysterious work trips that popped up without warning, and the way she seemed more and more protective of her phone. I started paying closer attention to her behavior, noticing the moments when she'd turn her phone screen away from me when a message came in. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but it was hard not to wonder, who was she texting? Why did she feel the need to hide it from me? One day, I decided to test the waters. Casually, I asked her if I could borrow her phone to make a call since mine was dead. The look on her face, it wasn't panic, but it was close. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second before handing it over, but that hesitation spoke volumes. She quickly unlocked the phone and handed it to me, but her eyes never left me as I dialed the number. When I finished, I handed it back to her, and she took it like it was the most important thing in the world. That's when my suspicion really started to take hold. I began to question things I had never questioned before. If she was hiding something on her phone, what else could she be hiding? My mind was spinning with possibilities, but I had no proof. Just this gnawing feeling that something was happening behind my back. One evening, I decided to check her social media. Not to spy, but just to see if there were any hints, anything that might explain the changes in her behavior. I scrolled through her posts, her comments, her likes. Everything seemed normal, just like it always had been. But then I noticed something strange. She had liked a series of photos from a guy I had never seen before. A guy whose name she had never mentioned. The photos were innocent enough, him at a party, him with friends, but there were comments from her on several of them. Things like "looks like fun" or "great pic." Small, innocent comments, but they stood out to me because she hadn't mentioned this guy at all. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something there. Who was this guy? Why hadn't she told me about him? I could feel my paranoia starting to take over, but I needed answers. I asked her about the guy in the photos, let's call him Mark. I brought it up casually, trying not to sound accusatory. Hey, who's Mark? I saw you liked some of his photos. She barely looked up from her phone. Oh, he's just someone from work. We had a project together last month. Her answer was so nonchalant, so casual, that for a moment, I felt ridiculous for even asking. But something about the way she brushed it off made me feel like she was hiding more. A project together? Then why hadn't she mentioned him before? We always talked about our work, our co-workers. Her answer left me with more questions than before, but I didn't push it. Not yet. But as the days passed, I noticed more little things that didn't add up. She started going out more, dinners with friends, she said, or drinks after work. Normally, that wouldn't have bothered me. She had her life, her friends, and I wanted her to be happy. But the timing of these outings started to feel suspicious. She'd tell me she was going out last minute, and sometimes, when I asked who she was going with, her answers were vague. Oh, just some people from work, she'd say, or you don't know them. I didn't want to be controlling or invasive, but it was hard not to feel like something was off. One night, she said she was meeting a friend for drinks and would be home by 9. But 9 came and went, and she wasn't home. 10 o'clock passed, and still no sign of her. I texted her to ask if everything was okay, and she didn't reply until almost an hour later. "Sorry, lost track of time, be home soon," she wrote. When she finally walked through the door after midnight, she looked flushed, almost guilty. She tried to play it off, saying that the conversation had gone longer than expected. But her explanation didn't sit right with me. Something was off. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the guarded behavior, it all pointed to one thing. But I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. I couldn't bring myself to believe that my wife, the woman I loved, could be cheating on me. I didn't want to be the jealous, paranoid husband who jumped to conclusions. But the clues were right there in front of me, and they were getting harder and harder to ignore. I had to know the truth. I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. So I made a decision. I was going to find out what was really going on, no matter what it took. The doubt, the suspicion, the growing sense of betrayal, it was all building up inside me. And I knew that sooner or later, everything was going to come to a head. Everything came crashing down one night, one ordinary, unsuspecting night. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to discover, but in hindsight, I think a part of me had been waiting for this moment all along. The clues, the suspicions, they had been building up for weeks, gnawing away at my peace of mind, but I still didn't want to believe that it would come to this. I didn't want to believe that my wife, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with, was capable of betraying me so deeply. It was late, around 11 p.m., and she had gone out again, this time for another so-called work dinner. She had become increasingly vague about these dinners, and my patience was wearing thin. This time, I didn't even ask who she was meeting. I didn't want another half-hearted explanation. I simply nodded and let her go, but inside, my mind was spinning. As the hours ticked by, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the clock, feeling that now all too familiar sense of dread settle in. Midnight came, then 1 a.m., and still, she wasn't home. I texted her, "Are you okay? What time are you coming home?" No response. That's when it hit me, harder than ever before, that something was terribly wrong. I couldn't sit there anymore, feeling helpless. My heart was pounding as I got up from the couch, pacing the room, wondering where she could be. After what felt like an eternity, I couldn't take it any longer. Desperate for answers, I grabbed her laptop, which was sitting on the kitchen table, and opened it up. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but I couldn't keep living with the uncertainty, the growing doubt that something was happening right under my nose. The moment I typed in her password and hit enter, my hands were shaking. I felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, about to look down into the abyss. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that I wouldn't find anything. But deep down, I think I knew what was coming. I opened her email first. At first glance, everything seemed normal: work emails, newsletters, the usual. But as I scrolled further, I found a thread of messages that made my heart stop. They weren't from anyone I recognized, and the subject lines were innocent enough, things like dinner plans or meeting up next week. But the content told a very different story. I opened one of the emails, and the words jumped off the screen. Asterisk, "I had such a great time with you last night. I can't stop thinking about it. When can we see each other again?" Asterisk. I froze. The room around me seemed to blur, and all I could hear was the thudding of my heart in my chest. I scrolled down, seeing her response, just as damning as the first. Asterisk, "I miss you already. Can't wait for next time. Let's make it soon." Asterisk. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't move. It was like time had stopped, and all I could focus on were those words that shattered everything I had believed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't some innocent miscommunication. This was an affair, and it had been happening right under my nose. I clicked through more emails, and it all became sickeningly clear. The late nights, the work dinners, the phone calls she took in secret, they were all for him. She had been lying to me for months, sneaking around, meeting this man while pretending everything was fine between us. I felt like my entire world was collapsing around me. But that wasn't the worst of it. As I scrolled further, I found photos, pictures of them together, laughing, holding hands. Some of them looked like they were taken in our city, while others were from places I didn't recognize, places she had never mentioned going. One image in particular broke me, the two of them sitting at a restaurant, her hand resting on his, a smile on her face that I hadn't seen in a long time. A smile that was meant for me, but had been given to someone else. At that moment, I felt everything inside me shatter. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built my life with, was living a lie. And I had been blind to it, wanting so badly to believe that our relationship was still the same as it had always been. But it wasn't. It had never been. I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind numb, my body frozen. How had it come to this? How could she have done this to me? All those nights she had looked me in the eye and told me she loved me, all the times she said she was just tired or just stressed from work, had been lies. I couldn't believe how easily she had deceived me, how perfectly she had maintained the facade of a loving wife while secretly betraying me. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the evidence of her affair, but eventually, I heard the sound of the front door opening. She was home. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly closed the laptop, trying to compose myself, though I felt like I was about to explode. She walked into the living room, looking surprised to see me still awake. "You're up late," she said, her tone casual, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just spent the night with another man. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep," I replied, my voice steady, though my hands were trembling. She smiled, setting down her purse and walking towards me. "It was a long night," she said, sighing. "I'm exhausted." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't recognize the person standing in front of me. This wasn't the woman I had married. This wasn't the person I had promised to spend my life with. This was someone who had lied, cheated, and destroyed the foundation of everything we had built together. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "I know," I said, my voice cold, my eyes fixed on hers. She froze, her smile fading as she looked at me with confusion. "I know everything." For a split second, she didn't move. Then I saw the color drain from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was already out. When the truth finally hit me, it wasn't like in the movies. There was no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match, no furniture thrown across the room. Instead, it was this cold, suffocating silence that consumed me. The moment I told her I knew, I watched the color drain from her face. It was as if time slowed down, and I could hear nothing but the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. I had imagined this moment so many times in my head, thinking I'd yell, demand answers, scream in anger. But when it actually happened, I felt frozen. Numb. She stood there in front of me, her eyes wide with shock, like a deer caught in headlights. She didn't say a word, and I didn't need her to. The silence between us was louder than any words she could have said. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. This wasn't some horrible misunderstanding that could be explained away. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life around, had been lying to me, cheating on me. I couldn't process it. I couldn't even fully comprehend the weight of it. My mind was racing, replaying all the moments I had trusted her, all the times I had believed in her excuses. The way she had smiled at me just days ago, kissed me goodbye before heading out for another one of her work meetings, knowing full well she was heading into the arms of another man. It was like I had been living in a parallel universe, blind to the reality of my own life. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me, and I was free falling into an abyss, unable to catch my breath. How could she do this? How could someone I had trusted with my whole heart turn around and destroy everything we had built? I had been so sure of us, so confident in our love, and now it all felt like a cruel joke. Everything we had shared, everything we had promised each other, had been a lie. I felt sick, physically sick. I could barely keep myself standing as the weight of it all came crashing down on me. Every memory of us together, every moment of joy we had shared, now felt tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of her betrayal. The trust, the intimacy, the connection we had, it was all gone. In an instant, everything was destroyed, and there was no going back. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, a mixture of anger and heartbreak that threatened to consume me. How could she stand there, silent, after everything she had done? How could she have kept this secret for so long, while pretending everything was fine between us? I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, demand to know why. But at the same time, I didn't want to hear anything she had to say. What could she possibly say to justify this? What could she possibly say to make this betrayal hurt any less? My mind was spiraling. I thought about all the times I had defended her, all the times I had given her the benefit of the doubt when things didn't add up. I thought about the nights I had stayed up waiting for her, believing her when she said she was just working late. I thought about the way she had looked me in the eye, kissed me goodnight, and gone on living this double life without a shred of remorse. Every detail of our life together flashed before my eyes, and all I could feel was disgust. It felt like I didn't even know who she was anymore. The person standing in front of me wasn't my wife, at least not the wife I thought I had. This was someone else, someone who had been lying to me for months, if not longer. I couldn't believe I had been so blind. I couldn't believe I had let this happen. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down. But inside, I was shattered. Every part of me felt broken, like I was standing in the ruins of my own life. I had always thought that no matter what happened, we could get through it together, that our love was strong enough to survive anything. But not this. There was no coming back from this. She had destroyed us, and I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for that. The pain was overwhelming, almost unbearable. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that hurt, it was everything it represented. The loss of trust, the loss of love, the loss of the future we had planned together. In that moment, I realized that the woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. She wasn't who I thought she was. And in some ways, that was the hardest part to accept. I couldn't even look at her anymore. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the lies, the betrayal, the nights she had spent with someone else. I felt a deep, burning anger rising in my chest, but it was tangled with heartbreak, with the crushing weight of loss. It was as if the person I had loved had died, and all that was left was this stranger standing in front of me. "I trusted you," I finally whispered, my voice breaking. "How could you do this to me?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. Her tears meant nothing to me. Nothing she could say or do would change the fact that she had broken my heart in the worst possible way. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it all away. The love, the trust, the years we had spent building a life together, it was all gone. And in that moment, as the reality of her betrayal sank in, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The air in the room was thick with tension as the silence between us stretched on, heavier than I could bear. I had just told her that I knew everything, and now, I waited for her response, every second feeling like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest, and the anger bubbling inside me threatened to spill over at any moment. But she stood there, frozen, as if she didn't know what to say, or maybe she was just calculating her next move. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know what you mean," she said, her eyes wide, her hands fidgeting nervously. It was a pathetic attempt at denial, and I felt the surge of rage rise in me. How could she stand there and pretend like she didn't know exactly what I was talking about? After everything I had just uncovered, how could she even try to lie? "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice low but sharp. "I've seen the emails. I've seen the pictures." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. There was no going back now. The truth was out, and there was no more hiding. Her face went pale, and she took a step back, like she had been physically struck. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me with a look of panic in her eyes. She knew she had been caught. There was no escaping it now. But instead of confessing, instead of telling me the truth, she did the one thing I hadn't expected, she broke down. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she started sobbing, her hands covering her face as if she couldn't bear to look at me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry." But her tears didn't move me. I had seen enough, heard enough. Her apologies felt hollow, meaningless, compared to the betrayal she had committed. "Sorry," I said, my voice rising in disbelief. "You're sorry? That's it? After everything you've done, after all the lies, all the sneaking around, you think sorry is going to fix this?" She dropped her hands and looked at me, her face streaked with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." My hands clenched into fists at my sides as I tried to keep my anger in check. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "You've been lying to me for months, maybe longer. You've been meeting him behind my back, while you come home and pretend everything's fine. How could you not mean for that to happen?" Her tears came harder now, but I wasn't moved. I was furious, hurt beyond words, and all I wanted was the truth. "How long has it been going on?" I demanded. "How long have you been lying to me?" She hesitated for just a second, just long enough for me to know that whatever she was about to say wasn't going to be the whole truth. But at this point, I didn't care anymore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. "A few months," she whispered, barely able to look at me. It started a few months ago." "A few months," I repeated, my voice bitter. I could feel the anger boiling over now. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you really think it was just a few months? Because the way you've been acting, the way you've been lying to me, it sure as hell feels like longer." She looked away, her tears falling silently as she bit her lip. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know how it happened. One minute we were just friends, and then what?" I spat, cutting her off. "You decided it was okay to destroy our marriage for this guy?" Her face crumpled, and she sobbed harder, shaking her head. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice sharp with pain. "You hurt me more than you'll ever understand. And you lied. Over and over again." She stood there, crying, but I was beyond caring. Her tears couldn't undo the months of deceit, the nights she had spent with him while I sat at home, trusting her. I thought of all the times she had looked me in the eye and lied, telling me she loved me, telling me we were fine while secretly living this double life. The betrayal was so deep, so overwhelming, that I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking. "I trusted you more than anyone in this world, and this is what you do. This is how you repay me." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Please, let me explain. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't want this." I laughed bitterly, the sound cold and empty. "What were you expecting? That I'd never find out? That you could keep sneaking around behind my back and I'd just keep trusting you like an idiot?" "No," she whispered, shaking her head. I knew it would come out eventually. I just didn't know how to stop." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She had known this day would come, and yet she kept going, kept lying, kept betraying me. I couldn't believe the audacity of it, the sheer cruelty of what she had done. And the worst part, I didn't even know if this was the whole truth. What else had she been hiding? What else was she lying about? Was he the only one? I asked, the question burning in my throat. Or were there others? She looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. "No," she cried, shaking her head frantically. "No, I swear. It was just him. It was a mistake. It was the biggest mistake of my life." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe that this was it, that there were no more secrets, no more lies. But how could I? After everything she had done, how could I believe a word that came out of her mouth? The room was spinning. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in on me. I wanted to scream, to yell, to make her understand the depth of the pain she had caused me. But at the same time, I felt exhausted, drained of every emotion I had left. All I could think about was how much I had loved her, how much I had trusted her, and how completely she had destroyed everything we had built together. "I can't do this," I whispered, shaking my head. I can't look at you right now." Her sobs grew louder, and she reached out for me, but I stepped back, my heart aching as I turned away. "Don't," I said, my voice cracking. "Don't touch me. I need time. I need to think." I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, broken, but not nearly as broken as I felt. As I closed the door behind me, I realized that this was the beginning of the end. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had shattered my heart into a million pieces. And no matter how many tears she cried, no matter how many apologies she offered, nothing would ever be the same again. The days after the confrontation were a blur of pain, anger, and confusion. I felt like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every morning, I'd open my eyes and for a few seconds, everything would seem normal. Then the crushing reality would hit me again. My wife had betrayed me, and the life I thought we had built together was nothing but a lie. I'd feel the weight of it settle over me, and it was like my heart was breaking all over again. The house was unbearably quiet. After that night, I asked her to leave. I couldn't bear to look at her, let alone be in the same space. She had offered to stay with a friend for a while, and I didn't argue. I needed space to think, to breathe, to process what had happened. But with every passing day, the silence became deafening. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence, it was a silence filled with questions, regret, and the constant replaying of every moment that had led up to her betrayal. The first few nights were the hardest. I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't let me rest. I kept seeing her face, hearing her apologies, and imagining her with him. Every time I closed my eyes, the thoughts came rushing back, as if my brain wouldn't allow me to escape the pain for even a moment. I'd toss and turn in bed, the emptiness next to me only serving as a cruel reminder of how much had been lost. The bed, once a place of comfort, now felt cold, like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. I felt like a shell of myself. During the day, I'd try to keep busy, go to work, distract myself with tasks, but even that felt impossible. Every little thing reminded me of her, of us. I'd catch myself staring at my phone, half expecting a message from her like I used to get when everything was normal. Or I'd see couples together, laughing and happy, and it would hit me like a ton of bricks that I no longer had that. It felt like the world was moving forward, but I was stuck, trapped in the grief of my shattered marriage. Anger and sadness battled inside me constantly. Some moments, I'd be overwhelmed with rage at her, rage at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I wanted to scream, to break something, to release the fury that had been building inside me since the moment I found out the truth. Other moments, I was just numb. The sadness weighed me down like a blanket I couldn't shake off. I felt like I was drowning in it, like there was no way out of the suffocating heaviness that had settled over my life. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over again. How could she do this to me? How could she throw everything away for someone else? Had she ever really loved me, or had it all been a lie from the start? I found myself replaying every moment of our relationship, looking for the cracks, the places where things might have gone wrong. I scrutinized every memory, wondering if I had missed something obvious. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the signs had been there, but I had been too blind, or maybe too trusting, to see them. The betrayal affected me on a deeper level than I had expected. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about the loss of trust, the feeling that the one person I had relied on, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, had deceived me. It shook me to my core. I started questioning everything, not just about our relationship but about myself. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this happen? I withdrew from people. I didn't want to talk to friends or family about what had happened. Part of me felt ashamed, like I had failed. Failed to keep my marriage together, failed to see the truth when it was right in front of me. I couldn't bear the thought of having to explain it to anyone, to relive the pain by talking about it. So I stayed quiet. I shut people out. I tried to carry the burden alone, even though it felt like it was crushing me. There were moments when I thought about calling her, just to hear her voice. Despite everything, part of me still missed her. How twisted was that? How could I miss someone who had hurt me so deeply, who had shattered my heart into pieces? But love doesn't disappear overnight, even in the face of betrayal. The love I had for her was still there, buried under the anger and the pain, and that only made it harder. I hated that I still cared about her, even after everything she had done. I tried to focus on myself, on rebuilding the pieces of my life that had been torn apart. But it wasn't easy. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders of her. Our house, once a place of love and comfort, now felt like a prison of painful memories. The pictures on the walls, the little things she had left behind, it all reminded me of what we had lost, of what she had destroyed. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in it all, like the weight of the betrayal was too much to bear. I thought about what our future would have looked like if this had never happened. I thought about the dreams we had shared, the plans we had made. It felt like all of that had been ripped away from me, leaving behind nothing but a void. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift inside me. The pain was still there, but I began to realize that I couldn't let it control me forever. I couldn't stay trapped in this cycle of anger and sadness, no matter how deep the betrayal had cut. I had to find a way to move forward, even if I didn't know what that looked like yet. I knew I deserved better. I deserved peace, even if it meant letting go of the person I had once loved so deeply. And so, slowly, I began to pick up the pieces. It wasn't easy. Some days, it felt like progress. Other days, it felt like I was back at square one. But little by little, I started to focus on myself, on what I needed to heal. I let myself feel the anger, the sadness, the grief, but I also started to accept that my life wasn't over. This betrayal wouldn't define me, even if it had left scars that would never fully heal. In the aftermath of it all, I learned one thing: I was stronger than I thought. Stronger than the betrayal, stronger than the pain. And though the road to healing would be long, I knew that I would come out on the other side, no longer defined by the person who had betrayed me, but by the person I would become in spite of it. In the weeks following the discovery of my wife's betrayal, the pain and anger ebbed and flowed, but one thing remained constant: I needed answers. The initial shock had paralyzed me, but once the dust started to settle, a new feeling took over, an insatiable desire to know the full truth. What I had uncovered was only the tip of the iceberg, and I knew that. The pieces didn't quite fit yet, and I wasn't going to let her lies be the final word on what had happened. I needed to understand how deep the deception went, how long it had been going on, and if there were more secrets waiting to be revealed. After she left, the house felt empty, but it gave me the space to dig deeper without feeling her presence looming over me. Every room, every object in our home seemed tainted by her betrayal, but I turned that pain into determination. I started by going back to the evidence I had already found: her emails, her phone messages, the photos. The moment I opened her laptop again, I felt the sting of that initial discovery, but this time, I was ready to dig deeper, no matter how painful it would be. I combed through her emails more carefully, scanning every word, looking for patterns, for more clues. I found more messages between her and the other man, let's call him Mark, and the more I read, the more disgusted I became. They talked about everything. Not just the nights they spent together, but their future. The plans they were making behind my back. It wasn't just an affair, it was something far deeper. They were talking about being together long term, about a future that didn't include me. One email in particular made my blood boil. She had written to him, "I can't wait to be with you without having to hide anymore. I'm so tired of pretending." Pretending? That word hit me like a punch to the gut. Pretending meant that everything she had shown me, every smile, every kiss, every moment we had shared, had been a facade. A lie. She had been pretending while my world was built on what I thought was love. I kept going, finding more and more messages, and with each one, my anger grew. But it wasn't just the anger that consumed me, it was the questions. Had she ever really loved me? Or had she been lying to herself as well as to me? I needed answers to these questions, and I knew the only way to get them was to confront her again. But before I did, I needed more information. I had to be sure there was nothing I was missing. I went through her phone records, trying to match up the nights she had said she was working late with the times she had been messaging him. The patterns were painfully clear. There were late-night calls to him on the nights she claimed to be with friends. Texts exchanged during weekends when she was supposedly out running errands. The lies stretched further back than I had originally thought. One weekend, I remembered she had gone away for what she said was a work retreat. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, her job often required weekend trips, but looking back now, I realized that something about it hadn't felt right. She had been strangely distant leading up to it, and when she returned, she hadn't been her usual self. I dug through her emails and found a confirmation for a hotel booking. It wasn't a work trip. It was a weekend getaway with him. That discovery hit me harder than I expected. The idea that she had gone away with him, while I had sat at home believing she was working, felt like the ultimate betrayal. I could picture them together, laughing, holding hands, completely oblivious to the fact that they were destroying my life. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to confront her again. I needed to hear the truth come from her own mouth, even if it hurt more than I could imagine. I called her and told her we needed to talk. She agreed, her voice trembling, as if she knew that this conversation was going to be the final reckoning. We met at a cafe, a neutral place, far from the home we had once shared. I watched her walk in, looking nervous, her eyes darting around as if she couldn't meet mine. The sight of her, the person I had loved and trusted for so long, filled me with a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and, strangely, a flicker of the love I had once felt for her. But I quickly pushed that aside. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about the truth. I need you to be honest with me, I said as soon as she sat down. I know about the emails. I know about the weekend. I know about all of it. But I need to hear it from you. She looked down at her hands, her face pale. I don't know what to say, she whispered. I've already told you I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough, I replied, my voice sharp. I want to know everything. When did it start? How long has this been going on? And why? Why did you do this to me? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. I was beyond her tears. It started almost a year ago, she said quietly. At first, it was nothing, just talking. But then, things changed. A year. I repeated, the word stinging like a slap. You've been lying to me for a year. She nodded, unable to meet my gaze. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You didn't mean for it to go this far? I repeated, incredulous. So what was the plan? To keep sneaking around forever? To leave me for him? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know what to do. I was confused. I never meant to hurt you. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding in my chest. You didn't mean to hurt me. You've been lying to me for a year. You've been planning a future with someone else. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed me. She wiped her tears, but I could see the guilt weighing heavily on her. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered. I don't expect anything. I'm so sorry. I stared at her, wondering if she even understood the magnitude of what she had done. Her apology felt hollow, empty, like she didn't fully grasp how deeply she had betrayed me. I didn't know what I had expected from this conversation, maybe more answers, maybe some closure. But instead, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of loss. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the person I thought I had known. She was a stranger now, someone who had hidden an entire life from me, while I had loved her blindly. As I stood up to leave, I realized that I wasn't going to get the answers I was looking for. No explanation would ever be enough. No apology would ever make up for the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. She had made her choices, and now, I had to make mine. I walked out of the cafe, feeling both heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier with the knowledge of the truth, but lighter with the realization that I didn't need her answers to move forward. The full story had been revealed, and it was as ugly and painful as I had feared. But now, it was time to let go. To stop seeking answers from her, and start finding them within myself. After that meeting at the cafe, I walked away with a mixture of emotions swirling inside me: anger, sadness, confusion. But most of all, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as if the weight of the truth had finally settled, and I could see my life for what it truly was. There were no more secrets, no more unanswered questions. I knew everything now. And the time had come to make the most important decision of my life. What was I going to do next? For days, I wrestled with the choice ahead of me. Should I try to save the marriage? Could I forgive her for what she had done? Could we rebuild the life we once had, or was it all too broken to fix? The thought of leaving her, of walking away from everything we had built together, was terrifying. Part of me clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. After all, we had shared so much. I had loved her so deeply. Could I really just let that go? But the betrayal was so deep, so raw, that I couldn't imagine ever trusting her again. Every time I thought about staying, about trying to rebuild, I'd be hit with the painful memories of what she had done. The lies, the deceit, the nights she had spent with someone else while I sat at home, completely oblivious. How could I ever look at her the same way again? How could I share a life with someone who had destroyed my trust so completely? The days stretched into sleepless nights, each one filled with agonizing questions. I'd lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every conversation, every moment we had shared, trying to make sense of it all. I thought about the promises we had made to each other, the future we had once planned. It felt like I was mourning the loss of someone who was still alive, mourning a relationship that had already died. One night, as I sat alone in the quiet of the house, I realized something that shifted everything. I wasn't just mourning the betrayal, I was mourning the person I thought she was. The person I had fallen in love with wasn't the same person who had lied to me, deceived me, and shattered my heart. She had made her choices, and those choices had changed her. And they had changed me, too. That's when the clarity hit me. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't rebuild something that had been so thoroughly destroyed. The love we had shared, the trust we had built, was gone. And no amount of apologies or promises to change could bring it back. It was time to walk away. The decision wasn't easy, it was the hardest choice I had ever made. But in the end, I knew it was the only one that would allow me to truly heal. Staying with her, trying to rebuild our life, would mean living in the shadow of her betrayal forever. It would mean constantly questioning her, doubting her every move. That wasn't a life I could live. That wasn't a future I wanted. Once I made the decision, something inside me shifted. The heaviness that had been weighing me down started to lift, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. I could see a future for myself, one that didn't include her, one that wasn't defined by the pain she had caused. The next step was telling her. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. She needed to know that this was the end. There was no going back. I couldn't live in a marriage built on lies, and I couldn't forgive her for what she had done. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. I called her and asked her to meet me. This time, it wasn't about seeking answers. This time, it was about closure. She sounded nervous on the phone, probably sensing what was coming, but she agreed. We met at the same cafe as before, the tension between us even thicker than the last time. She sat across from me, her eyes filled with worry, her hands clasped together on the table. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the pain, the lies, the betrayal, and the pity quickly evaporated. I've made my decision, I said, my voice calm but firm. She looked at me, her eyes wide, waiting for me to continue. I can't do this anymore. I can't stay in this marriage after everything that's happened. Her face crumpled, and tears filled her eyes. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please don't do this. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll change. Just give me another chance. But I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of peace as I spoke the words I had been rehearsing in my mind for days. It's too late for that. I don't trust you anymore. I don't think I ever will. And without trust, there's no foundation left to rebuild. It's over. She reached for my hand, her tears flowing freely now. I know I've hurt you, she said, her voice trembling. But please, we can still fix this. Don't throw everything away. But I had already made my choice. You threw it away the moment you decided to betray me, I said, pulling my hand back. I've thought about this long and hard. This marriage is over. The look on her face was one of devastation, but I didn't waver. I had given her everything, and she had shattered it. There was no going back from that. I'll get a lawyer, I said, standing up. We'll figure out the divorce as soon as possible. She didn't say anything as I walked away, leaving her behind in that cafe, just like she had left me behind months ago when she started living a life of lies. It was over. And though it hurt like hell, I knew I had made the right decision. As I walked out into the fresh air, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The chapter of my life with her was closed, and while the wounds were still raw, I knew I had done what I needed to do. Now, it was time to move forward without her. In the weeks and months that followed the end of my marriage, I went through a roller coaster of emotions. Some days, I felt liberated, free from the lies, the betrayal, the constant doubt that had weighed me down for so long. Other days, the sadness was overwhelming, as I mourned the life I thought I would have, the person I thought my wife was. It was like trying to find my footing again after an earthquake had shaken my entire world apart. But as time went on, something inside me shifted. I realized that this experience, as painful as it had been, had also taught me valuable lessons that would shape how I moved forward in life. Betrayal is a wound that cuts deep, but it also forces you to confront truths you may have been avoiding. It forces you to reassess your life, your relationships, and, most importantly, yourself. One of the biggest lessons I learned was about trust, not just in others, but in myself. Looking back, I realized that the signs of her betrayal had been there all along. My gut had tried to warn me, but I had ignored it, choosing instead to believe in the person I thought she was, rather than the reality of who she had become. In moving forward, I promised myself that I would never ignore my instincts again. I had to learn to trust my own intuition, to listen to that inner voice, even when it was uncomfortable. I also learned the importance of self-worth. When someone betrays you, it's easy to question your own value, to wonder if somehow you weren't enough. I found myself asking those questions: was I not a good enough partner? Did I do something wrong? But over time, I realized that her betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of her choices, her flaws, and her inability to be honest. I had given my all to our relationship, and her decision to cheat wasn't because of something I lacked. It was because of something she was missing inside herself. That realization was a turning point for me. Another hard truth I faced was that love, as powerful as it is, can't always save a relationship. I had loved her deeply, and I knew she had loved me once too. But love alone wasn't enough to sustain our marriage after the trust had been broken. Love without honesty, without respect, without loyalty, is fragile. It can't survive when it's built on a foundation of lies. That was a painful lesson to learn, but an important one. Moving forward, I knew that any future relationship I entered into had to be built on a strong foundation of trust and transparency. Love is beautiful, but it's not enough without those other essential elements. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that, despite the pain, this experience had made me stronger. It had forced me to confront my vulnerabilities, to face the parts of myself I had ignored, and to come out on the other side more resilient. I had survived the worst kind of heartbreak, and though the scars were still there, they were a reminder of my strength. I had learned how to stand on my own again, how to rebuild my life piece by piece, without relying on someone else to define my happiness. In time, I stopped thinking about her as much. The memories of our relationship, once so painful and raw, began to fade. I focused on myself, my passions, my interests, my friends, and my own personal growth. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, who supported me, and who reminded me of my worth. Slowly but surely, I started to heal. Looking back, I realized that, in a strange way, her betrayal had set me free. It had forced me to let go of a relationship that wasn't serving me anymore, to walk away from something that was already broken. And in doing so, I had rediscovered myself. I had found the strength to move on, to rebuild, and to create a new life for myself, one that was filled with truth, authenticity, and self-respect. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? What do you do when someone you trust, someone you love, betrays you in the worst possible way? The answer is different for everyone, but for me, the lesson was clear: betrayal doesn't define you. It's not the end of your story. It's a painful chapter, but it's not the whole book. Moving forward, I learned that sometimes, the hardest decision, walking away, is also the most powerful one. I learned that it's okay to let go of people who hurt you, even if you once loved them deeply. And most importantly, I learned that healing takes time, but it's possible. You can rebuild your life, even when it feels like everything has been shattered. If there's one thing I'd want you to take away from my story, it's this: you are stronger than you think. No matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how painful the heartbreak, you have the power to heal, to move forward, and to create a life that's better than the one you left behind. Now I want to ask you, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you forgive, or would you walk away? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore life's toughest challenges and the lessons we learn along the way.